Hi there, this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, and welcome to the alphabet of favourite films, and we have reached the letter N. Again, these are just a short, long list of my favourite films, and maybe one day I'll do a proper list of my favourite films. But for now, let's continue to enjoy your lists, and please do leave them in the comments below. I always look forward to reading them. First of all, I'd like to apologise for a couple of omissions in the letter M. I completely forgot about Fritz Lang's Metropolis. I'm not quite sure how I did that. And Leo McCarey's Make Way for Tomorrow, which I only saw 2 or 3 weeks ago and said to myself, I'll have to put that on the list for the letter M, and then completely forgot. So as usual, leave your comments, your lists for the letter N, because again there'll be films I haven't seen and there'll be films I've completely forgotten about. So for example, I have yet to watch Napoleon by Abel Gance, and I'm looking forward to watching it. But as usual, it's languishing in my backlog, so I still haven't watched Napoleon, so that very well may make the list in the future. Please let me know what it's like. We might as well start with naked things. There's a debate whether Mike Leigh's Naked made it. It didn't, but there is some kind of terrible majesty to that film, with a phenomenal central performance by David Thewlis. There's also The Naked City, a really nice proto-noir by Jules Dassin, which didn't make it either, and Cronenberg's Naked Lunch, which also didn't actually make it. But I'm going to start with some form of nakedness, and it's the Naked Gun Trilogy. Naked Gun 33 1/3, The Final Insult. Naked Gun 2 1/2, The Smell of Fear, and Naked Gun, From the Files of Police Squad. Now, before you perhaps suggest that Naked Gun films shouldn't be on a list of all-time great films or favourite films, answer me this: has the world become a worse place since Leslie Nielsen died? And the answer is yes. And there we have the reason why Naked Gun is on my favourite list. Leslie Nielsen plays it completely straight and is absolutely wonderful in it. It's not really the slapstick stuff that's the best, it's actually the little one-liners that just make it an absolute blast. They're short, they're only like 85 minutes, and they whiz by, but whenever you're feeling down or depressed, there's nothing better than putting on a Naked Gun film, or even, if you can find it, Police Squad, the original series, which has one of my favourite lines of all time when somebody asks Frank Drebin, "Who are you and how did you get in here?" and he says, "I'm a locksmith, and I'm a locksmith." Wonderful, silly, daft films, but just great central performance by Leslie Nielsen, and sadly he is greatly missed. Next on the list is Anthony Mann's Naked Spar with James Stewart and Ralph Meeker. Recently, The Far Country got a Blu-ray release by Arrow Academy, so hopefully Naked Spar will be next. Carole Lombard in the States has Bend of the River, so we're slowly getting all of the Jimmy Stewart Anthony Mann westerns on Blu-ray, and hopefully Naked Spar is included as well, because it's a really fantastic little film, and Jimmy Stewart gives another pre-Hitchcock dark, angry, savage performance. Next on the list is The Natural with Robert Redford. Now, I do like sometimes a film that's a bit depressing. This is based on a book, and in the book he is not quite Robert Redford, and he strikes out at the end. He doesn't hit the home run, and John Sayles has often said that if he made The Natural, it would be Nick Nolte instead of Robert Redford, and he would strike out at the end. But the thing is, I would actually be quite disappointed if he strikes out at the end. It's an example of Hollywood corn being golden. It's got a luminous, almost spiritual performance by Robert Redford. It's got great support by Wilford Brimley, Glenn Close. It's Barry Levinson's finest work. It's a slice of Americana that perhaps never really existed. It's about myth making and living legends, and yes, you can be cynical and say it's more of a fairy tale, but there's something about it that's quite wonderful. Speaking of quite wonderful, Catherine Bigelow's Near Dark, one of the best modern vampire films, even though the word vampire's barely used. It's essentially a modern western about a young boy who's not very bright, who falls for a girl who he spots in the middle of the night, and he gets embroiled with her family, who end up being cowboy vampires. It stars Lance Henriksen and Bill Paxton and Jeanette Goldstein, who were all in Aliens, and it's just a lot of fun. It's one of Lance Henriksen's finest work. It's got a pulsating, moody score by Tangerine Dream. I still think it's Catherine Bigelow's best film. And it's just fantastic and a lot of fun. I think it was released certainly the same year as The Lost Boys, if not, months apart. But certainly in the UK, Near Dark never got a cinema release. Near Dark was kind of the dark, violent one, whereas The Lost Boys was more for teenagers. Next on the list is a film that I've only recently discovered. It's The New Centurions. Thanks to Indicator for another wonderful release, film by Richard Fleischer. Nazarene Productions recently did a review of this film. I'll leave a link in the description below. And just a side note, remember to check out Solitary or Ronan Nazarene Talks, which is our collaboration podcast chat YouTube thing. We finished talking about Decalogue, and we recently did an episode on VHS memories. Again, I'll leave a link in the description. But back to the New Centurions, which has got a great performance by Stacey Keach and George C. Scott. It's written by Joseph Wambaugh, who's actually a cop, so it's one of the first films that's kind of about the day-to-day of being a police officer in Los Angeles. There's no Mr. Big, there's no big case. It's pretty much just day-to-day, how you survive, how you interact with your community and your environment. And it's one of those films that just blew me away when I first saw it, and it was kind of, how have I never seen this film? But you can see why it kind of fell through the cracks. It's not particularly mainstream material, but it's stunningly good. And speaking of another film that I wasn't really aware of until I actually bought the release, it's A New Leaf by Elaine May, starring Elaine May and Walter Matthau. And this is another absolute gem from the 70s. Again, Masters of Cinema released it, and again, I didn't really know much about it. And then when I watched it, I just absolutely love it. Walter Matthau gives one of his great performances as a millionaire playboy who has spent all of his money, and he kind of latches on to Elaine May, who's a botanist but has lots of money, and for most of the film he gets married to her, and then he tries to kill her for most of the film. It's just a great script, wonderful performances. It's another example of why it's a shame that Elaine May didn't get to direct more projects. Again, it's a film that I hadn't heard of, and I love Walter Matthau, and it's an essential purchase. Next on the list is New York Ripper by Fulci. This is on Shameless Blu-ray. This is Fulci's probably nastiest, most nihilistic, you might argue misogynistic film, but it's kind of one of those films you just need to see, especially if you're a fan of Donald Duck. It's a bizarre, strange, violent little film that, again, you find yourself saying, did I actually see that? Which you did. Yeah, it's one of those films that you need to see. It's probably not going to, well, I know it's probably not going to be on my shortlist, but you just have to kind of experience it at least once. Next on the list is another film that probably won't make my shortlist, and it's The Nice Guys by Shane Black. Now, there's no real reason for me to actually like the film. It's written and directed by Shane Black, starring Russell Crowe, who I'm not the biggest fan of, and what's his face? Ryan Gosling, who, strange enough by that intro, I'm not a huge fan of. And it is essentially just another buddy film, but there is just such a joy to it. It literally is a kind of shaggy dog story with two, well, one's an enforcer, the other one's a not very good private investigator. Both actors are just having a blast playing essentially bumbling oafs. They're as far away from their, leading man good looks as you could possibly get. It's funny, yeah, it's perhaps a little overlong, but the two lead characters just have so much fun. It is actually hard to resist. There's a great performance. Again, I apologise for not knowing her name. I'm going to say Angora Rice as the daughter of Ryan Gosling. It's just an absolute blast. Again, it's one of those films that you probably shouldn't like, but it is really enjoyable and it will put a smile on your face, which again doesn't happen with modern films that often. Next on the list, which will be on nobody's favourite film list, it's Nick of Time, directed by the wonderful John Badham, or the stunningly mediocre John Badham. But it stars Johnny Depp and Christopher Walken. This might be an example of my slight Christopher Walken bias. The gimmick is it's told in real time, as Johnny Depp has his little girl kidnapped at a train station, and he is forced by the evil Christopher Walken to assassinate a candidate for senator, I believe. There's maybe a reason why it's only on DVD. I mean, it's complete nonsense. Charles S. Dutton, as usual, gives dependable, wonderful support. Johnny Depp, clean cut, gives a fairly bog standard performance as man in peril. But the film belongs to Christopher Walken, sporting a wonderful moustache, and again he's got wonderful fruity dialogue and colourful dialogue. Thinking of it, it is probably for Christopher Walken fanboys like myself. But it's less than an hour and a half. It rattles along. There's some nice twists and turns. Peter Strauss even turns up. It's nonsense. It's cheesy nonsense, but it's also quite wonderful. But I'd be surprised if anybody else has it on their favourite list. Next on the list is something a little different. It's Night and Fog, or Nuit de Brouillard, if I can butcher the French. Alan Resnay's documentary from 1955, clocking in at a whopping 32 minutes. Spine number 197 on Criterion. It's essentially footage of concentration camps in 1955, cut with newsreel footage, and the voiceover is by a survivor. The Criterion release is very good. It's got an audio interview with Resnay from 1994. It's got an interview with Joshua Oppenheimer, who, for my money, has made the best film of the last 25 years, The Act of Killing. There's a 99-minute 2009 documentary featuring historian Sylvie Lindeberg. It explores the French memory of the Holocaust and the controversy surrounding the film's release. And there's a new subtitle translation, and there's also an essay in the booklet. It's one of those films that everybody should see. It should probably be shown in cinemas every now and again before the main feature, just to give people perspective, or as Spinal Tap said, too much effing perspective. Because I remember seeing it once and I was thinking, okay, this isn't too bad, and then it gets to about 20 minutes in, and then you just start seeing rooms full of hair that just seem to go on endlessly. And then there's a room full of shoes, there's a room full of glasses, spectacles. It was quite emotional the first time I saw it, and it still packs a punch for only 32 minutes. It's quite impressive when other people can make like 3-hour films, or kind of long films about the subject, and this kind of cuts to the point, and especially when you have the scene where the camp commandants are kind of standing up and going, "It's not my fault, I'm not responsible, it's somebody else that is responsible." Kind of an essential purchase. Next on the list is, again, it's another modern film. This is terrible. It's Nightcrawler with Jake Gyllenhaal. And again, it's really just for Gyllenhaal's performance. Again, not a huge fan of his work, even though I have quite a few of his films. I've heard that before. He's essentially an ambulance chaser, but with a camera, as he obsessively wants to get on the news and his footage to be used on the news. It speaks a lot about the society that we live in. Again, it's probably not going to end up on the short list, but it's well worth checking out. It looks really beautiful, and Gyllenhaal's performance is creepily empty in a good way. Next on the list is Nightmare Alley with Tyrone Power. This is a weird little noir about a con man who meets a fairly grisly fate. I won't spoil it for people who haven't seen it, but it is genuinely creepy and quite upsetting, and I'm not really sure why it's a PG. It really ought to be at least a 12 or a 15, because it is quite disturbing at the end. This film is quite funny because for about 18 months it was on Amazon saying it's coming out in Blu-ray, and you can pre-order the Blu-ray, and now they've just kind of given up. It's a bit like The Gunfighter with Gregory Peck. It seems to have been on pre-order for about 2 years, and then it's never actually appeared in a Blu-ray release. It does need a Blu-ray release. It's funny, it's a film that could probably go on Arrow Academy or Arrow Video, because it does take kind of dark and creepy turns. Speaking about dark and creepy, Night of the Demon, one of Jacques Tournier's finest films. This is the lovely Indicator release. Even though I'm a little bit annoyed, it's one of my great regrets of my life. I didn't actually get this from Indicator. This was before I really fell in love with Indicator and pre-ordered a lot of their stuff straight from them rather than Amazon. And if you'd pre-ordered from them, you would have actually got a business card of Julian Carswell with the invisible ink. And if you got it on Amazon, you didn't actually get the card. So, which still irks me. It's a beautiful little film. Dana Andrews is a skeptic. The Indicator edition has 4 different cuts of the film, if you're completely obsessed about it. One of Jacques Tournier's finest works. Oh, it's lovely. We're getting there. Next on the list Charles Laughton's only directorial debut. The Night of the Hunter. Again, I don't think it's quite as great as a lot of people say, but it's still textbook in light and dark. It looks absolutely beautiful. It's like a Baudelaire poem come to life. Robert Mitchum, obviously in one of his most sensational performances. A young Peter Graves as the bank robber who sets the whole thing in motion by telling preacher criminal Robert Mitchum about the money he stole. Lillian Gish gives a giddy little strong performance, but this is really about Mitchum and about Charles Laughton, just his use of the frame, sets that are really stagey but somehow lend another dimension of, again, another fable. It's almost like a grim prairie tale. A Brothers Grimm tale. It's just a beautiful film. For some reason it was a disaster on the box office, can't imagine why. Next on the list is Night of the Living Dead. Again, might not make the short list. It's a seminal film, but it still stands up as an awkward, disturbing, dark view of America in the late 60s. It's actually weird that it's now only a 15. I would still give it an 18. I know it's in black and white and there's more gory films, but it's the kind of ideas within the film and the manner of death and disembowelment that's in it that for me should still be an 18. I mean, I'm against censorship, I'm just for proper classification. There's quite a lot of films that I would just make 18s, but that's just me. Or R's in the US. Next on the list, it's a Jarmusch. It's Night on Earth. His episodic journey round the globe, featuring taxi drivers and various adventures from Paris to Finland, to New York, LA, and Rome with Roberto Benigni. Again, it's not Jarmusch's best film. If you're unfamiliar with his work, it's probably not the best one to jump into. But there's just lots of pleasures to be had if you are a Jarmusch fan, and it's got a really nice score by Tom Waits, which kind of gets into your head. Next on the list is Nikita. Might officially be La Femme Nikita, which nowadays there's still films being made about female assassins. So this is certainly kind of a blueprint for that, and its influence is still being seen all these years later. It's more violent than you probably remember it. It's quintessentially French. It's bursting with life and vitality. It's quite fantastic. Next on the list is Ninotchka with Greta Garbo, one of Lubitsch's finest films. Garbo plays a stern Russian agent who eventually breaks with the attentions of Melvyn Douglas. It's got fantastic dialogue, as you'd expect from a film of 1939, I want to say. Tremendous fun, one of Lubitsch's best, perhaps not to be as good as To Be or Not to Be, And on a side note, why hasn't Shop Around the Corner with James Stewart been released on Blu-ray yet? Somebody needs to do something about that. Somebody call somebody. Next on the list is a film that I'm not going to try and explain apart from just go and see it and let me know what you think if you haven't seen it already. It's The Ninth Configuration by William Peter Blatty, who of course wrote The Exorcist and also directed The Wonderful Exorcist 3, that not everybody thinks is wonderful but is. This is a very strange film. It's about Stacey Keach, who plays Colonel Kane, who is assigned to a mental asylum in this gothic castle, probably in the Carpathian Mountains. It feels like it should be in the Carpathian Mountains. And it's for soldiers who are either insane or trying to buy their ticket by pretending to be insane. You can't really describe it very well. You just have to watch it. I'm not the biggest Exorcist fan in the world. I don't think time's been kind to it. I think this is better than The Exorcist. Granted, I think Exorcist 3 is better than The Exorcist. This is by Second Sight, this release, and I would highly recommend it because there's a commentary with William Peter Blatty and Mark Kermode. There's an interview with William Peter Blatty, an interview with Stacey Keach. There's an interview with Stephen Powers, who plays Sergeant Christian in the film. There's interviews with production designer and art director. There's an interview with the soundtrack composer. And there's interviews with Tom Atkins, Jason Miller, Richard Lynch and William Peter Blatty. And an archive featurette with Mark Kermode and deleted scenes and outtakes. It's one of those films, again, that you're probably best watching late at night. And it will be a film that you will go, did I see that? Or did I dream that? Or that can't be real. Surely they couldn't get away with that. Yeah, The Ninth Configuration. So much better than The Eighth Configuration. Next on the list is No Country for Old Men, not True Grit, which is still very good. No Country for Old Men is probably the Coen brothers' last great film, even though I do have a problem with one scene, which I made a copy of the film and re-edited it. I just love the fact that there's no score. I love the fact that as an audience we're not given the release of the showdown between the goodie and the baddie. I mean, Javier Bardem's performance is a little bit chewing scenery slightly, but there's a lot to like in the film. I love how it ends. Yeah, No Country for Old Men. A really nice little film. Speaking of really nice little films, it's Shklovsky's No End, which is... I'll try not to get emotional when I'm talking about Shklovsky. It's one of his finest works. Granted, everything he does is one of his finest works. Set in 1982. It's about the wife of a lawyer who kind of has to get her life together, and she gets involved with an older lawyer who's fighting for a guy who was on strike. This is in the height of when Solidarity was banned. And the, not really going into spoiler territory, but the ghost of her husband is still around and is still watching over her. Zbigniew Preisner did the score, who obviously did the score for Decalogue and Three Colours and Double Life of Veronique. It's a beautiful, spare, moving film, and if you're a fan of Kieslowski, it's a must own. And if you're not a fan of Kieslowski, it's a must own. Something completely different. North Dallas 40. I'm a huge NFL fan. Have been since 1985. And there's just not that many good American football films. They never kind of get the realism right. They never really get the game action right. There's lots of baseball films that are really good. But North Dallas 40, it was written by an ex-player. It's loosely veiled about the Dallas Cowboys and Tom Landry, who, those people who don't know, was a God-fearing, cold technician of a coach. The coach in this is a really good performance by J.D. Spradlin, who's not supposed to be Tom Landry, honest. And Nick Nolte plays a kind of a receiver who's getting to the end of his career. He needs to take painkillers just to get out of bed. He's had so many surgeries and he's just worn down by the business side of the game and the kind of joy has been taken out of it for him by the business side. It's made in the 70s and it really captured that period when the players used to party hard and play hard. It's, again, if you're not a fan of American football, it might not interest you as much, but it is a really good story about a man who doesn't want to do the thing that he loves, the thing that he lived for pretty much all his life, the thing that he's done all of his life, and he doesn't want to do it anymore for various reasons. It's got a wonderful last scene, and it's rough around the edges, but there's a lot of heart to it. Not in a sentimental sense, it's about a real person. North Dallas 40. Can we get a Blu-ray release of that as well, please? Thank you. Next on the list, it's Nosferatu. Not surprisingly, but also Herzog's Nosferatu. You all know about Nosferatu, so I'm just going to briefly talk about Herzog's Nosferatu. Don't worry, we're getting to the end of the video, you're okay. You can go about your normal business. It speaks to how great Herzog is, even though, to me, for some reason, he's still underrated. That you can take a great film like Nosferatu, which is seminal, which is so inspirational, and he can make a great film himself from a remake. It's not just a by the numbers, scene for scene, shot for shot, soulless remake. He manages to, in some level, make Nosferatu, played by Klaus Kinski, more pathetic. There's there's a stench to the film. You really almost get the disease, the plague. You can almost feel it coming out of the screen at you. There's almost a kind of celebration of disease in the film. It's wonderful. The ending is really bleak, which is maybe why I really like it. The shots, again, water and trees. It's one of the most atmospheric films, which is a remake of one of the most atmospheric films of the silent era. And again, it just speaks to the mastery of Herzog. That you could take something that for other directors would just be like a throwaway remake, and make it something mysterious and creepy and wonderful. Next on the list is another atmospheric and wonderful film, Tarkovsky's Nostalgia. This is the one about a Russian poet travelling through Italy, researching the life of a Russian composer, and just the interactions with the people he meets, which makes him homesick of Russia. That's all that happens. But again, there's a world weariness to the lead character. He's having an affair with his translator, but he gets to the point he can't even be bothered. He's almost comatose throughout most of the film. The final scenes are some of the most amazing shots you'll ever see in cinema history. I remember the first time I saw the film, I was literally agog. That's how impressive I was. I was agog. Tarkovsky's use of water and nature, we all know, is superlative. Yeah, again, you can't really go into too much plot with Tarkovsky films because they're not really about the plot. They're about journeys into the mind. And they're beautiful, even though they're tragic. Nostalgia. Happy days. And finally, you'll be glad to know Nothing Sacred with Carole Lombard, which I'm almost as biased about as I am with Christopher Walken. This is another wonderful screwball comedy directed by William Wellman. This Kino Lorber actually has an audio commentary by William Wellman Jr. And it stars Frederick March. He's a newspaper man who gets wind that Carole Lombard is dying through radium poisoning, even though she's not, and offers her a free trip to New York. So, of course, she plays up the fact that she is dying. It's just a wonderful film. Not that I'm biased, but Carole Lombard in any way, shape or form. Even the Wicked Witch of the West, Margaret Hamilton, turns up. I mean, what more could you ask for? Carole Lombard, Frederick March, radium poisoning, and the Wicked Witch of the West. I rest my case. So thanks very much for watching. Fortunately, that wasn't quite as long as the letter M. Again, please do leave your lists. I look forward to reading them. Especially yours, Stephen. Because again, there'll be films I've completely forgotten about. Films that I should see. And thank you very much for watching. And who knows, when you come back again, we might actually do the letter O, which would be a shock to everybody. So this is Solitary Ronin, saying thank you so much for watching. I do appreciate it, and hopefully I'll see you again. Farewell.